Millionaire never knew why his daughter pointed at window daily until the nanny did the unthinkable. In a bustling city where skyscrapers touched the clouds and glittering lights poured over every street, there stood a vast mansion resting quietly amid its silent gardens. This house belonged to Adrian, a man who had built an empire in real estate. He was wealthy, influential, and once admired for his brilliance and ambition. Yet after his wife died in an accident many years ago, Adrian became a different man. Success and fortune could not hide the deep emptiness that consumed him from within. People often saw him in flawless suits, walking into important meetings, signing lucrative deals. But when he returned home, he faced only heavy silence. Inside the mansion, too large for comfort, there were only Adrian and his little daughter. Lila, a 7-year-old girl on the autism spectrum, spent her days in stillness. Every single day, she sat quietly by the grand living room window, her gaze fixed on the back garden. Her small fingers pointed again and again toward the same familiar corner, her lips repeating a phrase that most dismissed as meaningless. "Daddy? Again? There." The maids, the driver, the cook, they had all grown used to the scene. They walked past, heard the words, and ignored them. To them, it was nothing more than the peculiar habit of a different child. But Lila remained, patient and persistent, repeating what she longed to express, though no one truly listened. One Monday morning, the iron gates of the mansion opened to welcome the footsteps of a young woman. Her name was Elena. Coming from a poor suburb, she was familiar with hard labor and the silence of a struggling life. Getting the job as a caretaker in Adrian's household filled her with both relief and unease. The house was too vast, too elegant, and even the air inside made her feel out of place. On her first day, Elena quietly followed the head housekeeper through the rooms. Everyone worked in an odd silence, speaking little, barely glancing at one another, as if they were all trying only to finish their duties. There was no laughter, no conversation. The heavy atmosphere made Elena feel this was not just a house, but a box holding spirits already worn thin. As she walked down the long hallway, Elena suddenly stopped. By the grand window, she saw a little girl. It was Lila. The child sat motionless, her gaze locked onto the back garden. Her tiny finger pointed persistently toward the same corner. A soft voice rose, steady and unchanging. "Daddy, again, there." The housekeeper ahead didn't even pause. He glanced back and said coldly, "Don't mind her. The master's daughter. She's special. Just leave her be." Then he walked on. But Elena couldn't move right away. Something in her heart sank. Lila's eyes looked far too lonely, far too desperate, as though she was trying to tell the world something vital. Yet no one cared to listen. In the days that followed, Elena began to notice the little girl more closely. She didn't intrude or force her to speak. Each morning, as she passed by, she simply smiled and greeted softly. At first, Lila didn't react, but soon her eyes began to follow Elena's figure. A small flicker of light, but enough to signal that change was beginning. That afternoon, when she handed her a piece of fruit, Lila took it and said a word that made her freeze. "Mom." At first, Elena thought she had misheard, but then Lila repeated it. "Mom." She didn't know what to say. Her heart felt both heavy and full. She sank down beside him, gently touching his hand. "My name is Elena," she said softly. Theo looked at her and smiled again. Elena didn't know why Lila called her mom, but she didn't feel upset. On the contrary, she was moved. She understood that Lila didn't say that word lightly. Maybe the child truly remembered her mother and saw something in Elena that brought it back, or maybe she simply felt safe. Either way, Elena didn't correct her. She let her call her that. Every time the girl said Mom, Elena only smiled and answered with kindness. But Adrian didn't think much of it. When Elena told him, he just shrugged. "She's mistaken. That's just how she is." Elena didn't argue, but deep inside she sensed something more profound. Theo was trying to connect, and Elena was the only one willing to listen. In the days that followed, Elena noticed something remarkable. Whenever Lila sat by the window, her small finger always pointed toward the same corner of the garden. Not to the blooming flower beds or the shining fountain, but to a hidden spot where wild grass grew tall and old trees cast long shadows. Each time her gaze fixed there, her fragile voice returned. "Daddy, again, there." The words sounded like a plea for help, a memory she couldn't release, or perhaps a secret no one had cared to hear. Elena began spending more time sitting beside her. She didn't press with questions. She simply stayed, letting Lila feel the presence of someone who noticed. Slowly, Elena saw relief in the girl's eyes whenever she wasn't alone. Lila was no longer completely invisible. One late afternoon, as the sun tilted toward the horizon, Elena leaned closer and whispered, "Do you want me to go with you out there?" Lila stayed silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. Her small hands trembled, yet she placed them into Elena's. Together they walked down the hallway, past the kitchen, and out the back door. Lila moved carefully but with certainty, her gaze never leaving the garden corner ahead. Elena followed, her heart racing, sensing they were about to uncover something important. Through thick patches of grass, they stopped at the secluded spot. Elena brushed aside some branches, and what appeared made her breath catch. An old swing. Its wooden frame tilted, the metal rusted, the ropes frayed, yet it still stood. Lila did not hesitate. She stepped forward, sat down, and began to sway gently. Her eyes closed, her lips whispered, "Mommy." Elena froze. She understood at once. This was no game. It was a memory. That swing had once been tied to moments of love, when her mother held her, played with her. Now it was the only thread pulling her back to what she had lost. In that moment, Elena saw the truth clearly. Lila had never spoken nonsense. For years she had tried to show the world the trace of love she remembered. No one had listened, until now. From the day they discovered the old swing, Elena began taking Lila to that hidden corner of the garden more often. At first, just for a few minutes, and then, little by little, it became their afternoon ritual. Lila would sit on the crooked wooden seat, her hands gripping the frayed ropes, while Elena stood behind, gently pushing her back and forth. Each time the swing rose higher, a bright smile bloomed across the little girl's face. It was a real smile, pure, unforced, untouched by loneliness, the kind no one had seen from Lila in a long time. One afternoon, as the breeze passed through, her hair lifted and she leaned back laughing out loud, her voice echoing through the garden. Elena stood still for a moment, feeling as if the once-forgotten place had suddenly come alive. Another time, Lila picked up a fallen golden leaf, placed it carefully in Elena's palm, and whispered a single word. "Pretty." Just one word, yet it brought tears to Elena's eyes. Gradually, the laughter was joined by other moments. Lila began humming softly as she swung, sometimes just random sounds, but enough for Elena to feel her soul opening. At times, she reached out her hand toward the sunlight streaming through the branches, as if trying to catch something fragile. One late afternoon, as the sunlight turned golden across the trees, Elena, as usual, took Lila out to the garden. The little girl sat on the swing, her smile beaming brighter with every push. Her laughter rang clear through the air, lightening Elena's heart. But as the swing slowed, Lila suddenly stopped laughing. Her eyes froze on something hidden beyond the thick bushes. Elena followed her gaze, and her chest tightened. There stood a strange boy. He looked about Lila's age, thin, with torn clothes and messy hair. His face was streaked with dirt, but his eyes, sharp and luminous, were startlingly familiar. They were the same as Lila's. What stunned Elena most was the girl's reaction. Instead of shrinking back or hiding as she usually did, Lila hopped off the swing and moved toward the boy with a rare smile and outstretched hands, as if greeting an old friend. Elena had never seen her so eager, so open. The boy said nothing at first. He simply looked at Lila, then smiled back. Within moments, the two began to play together, taking turns pushing each other on the swing, running across the grass, or simply sitting side by side in silence, their eyes speaking for them. Elena stood frozen, watching. Lila had never connected so easily with anyone, not even with children who had been invited over before. Yet with this strange boy, everything unfolded effortlessly, as though the two souls had always been linked. Elena stepped closer, bent down gently, and asked softly, "Who are you? What's your name?" The boy stayed silent, lowering his head. Elena tried another way. "Are you hungry? Would you like something to eat?" The boy looked up, and for a brief moment his eyes lit up. Then he gave the faintest nod. Elena opened her bag and handed him a sandwich. He devoured it as if he had been starving for a long time. Watching him, Elena's heart tightened. While he ate, the boy still didn't say a word. But Lila was different. She sat beside him, holding tightly onto the swing's chain, occasionally smiling at him as though she had been waiting for this day all along. Between the two children, no language was needed. Only their eyes and smiles were enough to understand each other. Elena observed more closely. The brown hair, the shape of his face, especially the eyes, all of it sent a chill through her. She whispered, almost only to herself, "They look so alike." In that instant, a powerful intuition rose within her. This boy wasn't just a child who had appeared by chance. A great secret lay hidden behind his presence. And Lila, somehow, had recognized that truth from the very first moment she saw him. As the sunset fell, the boy suddenly stood up. Without a word of farewell, he simply placed his hand gently on Lila's shoulder, gave her a smile, then turned and ran into the woods behind the house. Lila didn't cry, didn't look sad. She only watched him go with a calm, peaceful gaze. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The image of the strange boy haunted her. At last, she decided she had to speak with Adrian. In his elegant study, he sat at the great wooden desk, his eyes fixed on piles of documents. When Elena knocked, Adrian looked up, slightly impatient. But as she told him everything, about the boy in the garden, the eyes identical to Lila's, the way the two had connected instantly, Adrian fell silent. He rose and walked to the window, staring into the darkness outside. His voice was rough. That corner of the garden. I had forgotten it. He paused, drew in a deep breath, and gave a bitter smile. When she was alive, my wife often took Lila there. I remember once watching them from a distance. She pushed our daughter on that swing, and Lila laughed. The sound filled the whole garden. I haven't thought of that in years. Adrian's hands clenched, his gaze distant. After she died, I avoided that place. I was afraid, because every time I passed by, the memories came rushing back. I told myself to forget, and the swing was abandoned along with them. Turning back to Elena, his voice broke. Now I see. Lila's words were never meaningless. They were memories. They were her way of calling me back, to a part of the past I chose to leave behind. In that moment, Elena saw clearly. The cold, distant man was beginning to crack open. Beneath the armor was still a grieving father, one who had lost too much, and one who had never learned how to listen. And now, the forgotten corner of the garden was leading them back to the truth. The next day, Adrian could not shake the thoughts of the strange boy. Those familiar eyes unsettled him deeply. After speaking with Elena, they decided to search the woods beyond the garden. That afternoon, they followed narrow trails covered with dry leaves. The forest was quiet, save for the distant call of birds. At last, they found the boy curled up by a tree, clutching his empty stomach. He flinched when he saw them, but before he could run, Elena stepped forward gently, offering him food. Adrian stood behind, his face stern yet filled with concern. "Don't be afraid. We just want to help," Elena whispered. The boy looked at the food, then at Elena. After a long pause, he reached out and took it. Adrian drew a deep breath, his voice softer now. "Come home with us. You can't live here forever." The boy lowered his head, silent, but when Adrian extended his hand, he finally rose. Together, the three walked back to the mansion. As soon as they entered the yard, Lila ran out from the house. Her eyes lit up as she dashed toward him, throwing her small arms around the boy and murmuring the familiar phrase, "Again, again." Elena and Adrian stood frozen, overwhelmed by the scene. That evening, Adrian called the local police. Over the phone, the officer explained, "The boy is an orphan. His parents died in an accident years ago. He's been wandering near the forest ever since, sometimes surviving on the kindness of locals, but mostly on his own." When Adrian hung up, he turned back. The boy and Lila were by the swing, laughing softly as they played with sticks. Their faces glowed as if they had found something long lost. A strange mix of sorrow, wonder, and hope rose in Adrian's chest. He stepped closer, knelt down, and asked with steady warmth, "Who are you? Why are you here?" This time, the boy didn't look away. His eyes met Adrian's, clear yet heavy with sadness. His voice came softly as if he had waited years to speak. "My name is Daniel. When Lila's mother was alive, she used to meet me at the edge of the forest. She brought me bread, milk, sometimes even clothes. She called me the little boy of the woods." Daniel swallowed hard before continuing. "I remember she once brought Lila, too. We played on the swing together, sometimes running around the bushes. She sat nearby, smiling so kindly. For me, those were the happiest days." Tears welled in Adrian's eyes. He saw once more the image of his wife, gentle, compassionate, quietly sharing her love not only with her daughter, but also with an orphaned child. And now that very child stood before him, a living fragment of the past returned. Elena placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder and whispered, "Do you see? This boy is the bridge between past and present. And Lila, she remembers it all." Adrian nodded, eyes glistening. That night, after listening to Daniel share the memories tied to his late wife, Adrian sat in silence for a long time. Inside his chest, pain mixed with an unfamiliar sense of relief. The fragments of memory he had tried so hard to bury were now gently brought back by an orphan boy, as if fate itself were offering him a chance at redemption. When Daniel rose, ready to leave the living room out of habit, Adrian stepped forward and lowered himself to the boy's eye level. He drew a deep breath, his voice low yet trembling. "Daniel, would you let me try? Would you let me be your father and stay here, as part of this family?" The boy froze. His eyes widened, his hands clutching at the hem of his shirt. For a moment, fear overtook him, the fear of being abandoned once again. He stared at the floor in silence, wrestling with himself. Then, slowly, Daniel looked up and whispered timidly, "Could I? Really? What if one day you no longer want me?" Adrian's heart clenched. He quickly clasped those fragile hands, his voice breaking. "I missed far too much with Lila. I swear I won't repeat that mistake. If you'll let me, I will be your father. And this time, I will never let go." Tears welled up and rolled down Daniel's thin cheeks. After a long, trembling pause, he broke down, throwing his arms around Adrian, whispering through sobs. Then, I want it. I want to call you Father. In that instant, Lila leapt from the sofa, her little arms wrapping tightly around Daniel. She couldn't understand all the words, but her radiant smile and the soft murmur, "Again, family," spoke for her. From a distance, Elena stood with misty eyes, overwhelmed by the sacred simplicity of the moment. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, falling gently on Daniel's face, still puffy from a night of tears. Adrian entered the room, a coat draped over his arm. His voice was warm, steady. "Get up, son. Today I'm taking you to complete the paperwork. From this day on, you won't just be a guest in this house. You'll be my son, legal, rightful, and forever." Daniel blinked in surprise, then slowly smiled. There was still a shadow of doubt in his eyes, but beneath it shone a new light of hope. This was no longer a fragile dream. It was the beginning of something real. A few days after Adrian decided to take Daniel as his son, there remained something unsettled in his heart. He wanted this new family, Lila, Daniel, and even Elena, to walk together to the place where all the pain had begun. One early morning, with dew still clinging to the leaves, Adrian prepared the car. He spoke softly to the children. "Today, I want to take you to meet someone. Very important." Lila tilted her head, curious but silent. Daniel hesitated, but when Adrian held his hand firmly, he only nodded. Elena joined quietly, her presence a steady comfort. The journey led them to a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. It was peaceful, the wind whispering through rows of birch trees. Adrian stopped before a marble headstone engraved with the name of the woman he had never ceased to love, Clara. He stood still for a long time, his shoulders trembling as years of buried grief resurfaced. Slowly, Lila stepped forward, her tiny hand brushing the stone. Her eyes lit up as though she recognized the presence of the mother she remembered only in fragments. Daniel stood silently by. Then, in a trembling voice, he said, I remember her. She used to bring me bread, milk." And she smiled so kindly. Adrian turned to him, eyes brimming with tears. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and whispered, "You kept a piece of her that I lost. Thank you, son." Elena approached, bowing her head gently toward the grave. In that moment, the four of them, each carrying their own wounds and memories, stood together in silence, letting their hearts speak instead of words. Adrian knelt, placing a bouquet of pale blue hydrangeas, Clara's favorite, before the stone. His voice broke as he said, "Clara, do you see? This is Lila, our daughter. She still remembers you, still calls for you every day. And this is Daniel, the boy you once protected. It feels as if you left him here for us, as if you knew we would need him to be whole again. I've found him, and today I've made him our son. You're still here, in every laugh, in every moment you left behind." Lila crouched by the grave, whispering softly, "Mommy, again." Daniel rested his small hand on her shoulder. In their eyes, there was no longer only emptiness, but an invisible thread binding them, a family being made whole. Elena wiped her tears quietly, sensing something sacred. Here, in the silence of the cemetery, a new beginning was being blessed. Adrian rose and drew both children into his arms. Looking up at the sky, he murmured, "I was lost, but now I've found the way. Thank you, Clara." A gentle breeze stirred, scattering petals as if in reply. As they walked away, the morning sun broke through, stretching their shadows along the narrow path. 3 small figures beside one tall figure. A family imperfect, but whole in its own way. And somewhere, Clara was surely smiling. From the night Adrian declared he would take Daniel as his son, the atmosphere inside the vast house began to shift. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried the sounds of small footsteps, pure laughter, and simple, tender words. Lila changed the most. No longer did she sit by the window muttering lonely words. Now, every morning she searched for Daniel, tugging his hand toward the garden. At the old swing, they took turns pushing each other, their laughter carrying so far that even the house staff couldn't help but smile. To Adrian, it felt like a miracle he had never dared to believe in. Daniel, once a timid boy accustomed to living quietly in the forest, slowly grew more open. Elena cared for him with patient devotion, serving him full meals, teaching him to read a few simple words, and telling bedtime stories. For the first time in years, Daniel slept on a soft bed, under the glow of a warm lamp. The next morning, he woke in awe, as though still unsure it was real. Adrian himself began to change day by day. He spent more time at home, leaving his office earlier to join the children in the garden. Once he clumsily pushed the swing, making both Daniel and Lila laugh until their sides ached. Another time, he sat on the living room floor, helping them build a castle from wooden blocks. Those small moments stitched his heart back together, piece by piece. One evening, Adrian said quietly to Elena, "I used to believe I would live forever in emptiness, never finding a way out. But now, watching those two children, I know I've been given a second chance." Elena smiled, her gaze gentle. "The truth is, you're changing too. You've opened your heart to listen. And that's what Lila and Daniel need most. The house that once felt cold had become a true home." And within Adrian, a firm resolve grew stronger. He would never let these children face loneliness again. The old swing in the garden, once a keeper of painful memories, had now become a symbol of new beginnings. Every afternoon, Lila and Daniel ran to it. Beneath the canopy of trees, they took turns pushing each other, their laughter mingling with the rustling wind. Sometimes Elena spread a small blanket nearby, watching with a gentle smile. Other times Adrian stepped outside, sitting on the steps as he watched his daughter and his newly found son play. His gaze was softer than it had ever been. One day, Adrian decided to repair the crooked frame with Daniel. Together they replaced the frayed ropes, scrubbed away the rust, and painted the wood a bright white. When it was done, Lila rushed over, squealing with joy as she climbed onto the seat, her small legs swinging in the breeze. Daniel pushed her higher, while Adrian and Elena laughed together. The swing was no longer just a plaything. It had become a witness to love and healing. Where once Lila had whispered again in solitude, the air now carried the sound of shared laughter. One evening, as the children laughed beneath the setting sun, Adrian sat on the steps. Elena stood nearby, a cloth still in her hand from cleaning. He looked at her and smiled softly. "You know, without you, I would never have seen this." Elena paused, then returned a gentle smile. "I only did what anyone should do, listen to a child." Adrian lowered his gaze to his hands, his voice thoughtful. "But to me, it changed everything. You didn't just listen to Lila, you taught me to listen to myself." At that moment, Elena lifted her eyes and met his steady, sincere gaze. Amid the lingering grief, a new warmth quietly stirred, subtle, yet undeniable. In the days that followed, they often sat closer together in the garden, watching the children play. Sometimes Adrian shared memories of his late wife, the beauty and the ache of what was lost. Other times, Elena spoke of her own struggles, of the years she carried her family on her shoulders. There were no grand promises, only a gentle harmony between them. And there, by the swing, the symbol of memory, of loss and of hope, a new seed of affection was planted, quietly but steadfastly taking root. Years passed, and time brought gentle change to both the garden and the people within it. The once forgotten yard was now alive with roses climbing fences, birdsong each morning, and in its corner the old swing, restored and sturdy, stood as a symbol that would never fade. Lila and Daniel had grown. Lila pursued art therapy, using colors and music to heal children with autism. Daniel became a social worker, tirelessly visiting orphanages, bringing hope to children who shared his past. Their paths diverged, but their bond never loosened. Sitting side by side, they always returned to the same place, two souls who had once found each other by the swing. Adrian had changed too. No longer cold or distant, he founded the Clara Foundation, named after his late wife, to support autistic children and orphans. The foundation became not just an institution, but a legacy of love, continuing Clara's compassion. At gatherings, Adrian often said, "Love never dies. It transforms, spreading from one heart into many." At the center of it all remained Elena. She never sought recognition, but her patience and gentleness were the threads binding the family. To Lila and Daniel, she was mother. To Adrian, she had become not only a partner, but the very anchor of his life. One evening, beneath the golden sunset, Adrian led Elena to the swing, the place where it all began. Taking her hand, his voice trembled, yet carried all his truth. "Elena, you've given me what I thought I could never have again. You brought laughter back to my daughter, brought Daniel into our lives, and brought light back to me. But most of all, you brought love back into my heart, and that love is you. When I lost my wife, I lost my world. But then you came, quietly healing the wounds I couldn't face. I don't want another day without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Elena's tears streamed down her cheeks, but her radiant smile gave the answer. She nodded, and from across the garden, Lila and Daniel cheered, rushing over to embrace them. Their laughter and tears filled the air, a chorus of joy and healing. The wedding was held right there in the garden, beneath an arch of white flowers. It was simple, yet sacred, with only close friends, family, and children from the foundation. Lila walked beside Elena in a little white dress, while Daniel carried the rings. As Adrian and Elena exchanged vows, the sun set, and children's laughter blended with their promises, creating a scene both tender and timeless. From that day on, the house was no longer just a shelter, but a true home. Meals were filled with warmth. Adrian learned to make Elena's morning coffee while she read beside him at night. Sometimes they shared only a glance across the room, and that was enough to say love had found them again, deeper and steadier than before. Years later, when Lila and Daniel were grown, they returned to the garden, sitting once more on the swing together. From afar, Adrian and Elena, hand in hand, watched them with hearts full. The swing swayed gently, carrying laughter, memories, and hope. A circle was complete, from grief and loss to healing and love. But it was also a beginning, a future rewritten where compassion, listening, and love would continue to be passed down from one generation to the next.